Hello, and welcome to our webinar, The Art of International Trade in a Post-Brexit World. I'm Lee McDarby, CEO of UK International Payments here at Moneycorp. Today's session will be chaired by Dr. Adam Marshall, former Director General of the British Chamber of Commerce, Vice Chair of the World Chambers Federation, and also a Director of Industry and Parliament Trust, of the Industry and Parliament Trust. At Moneycorp, we are proud to be able to support businesses through what is still a very turbulent and unpredictable time, by bringing you knowledge and guidance from industry experts, as well as full access to our world-leading partnership network. Our team are on hand to assist with international payment requests as well as business introductions. Before I hand over to Adam, a few housekeeping points to begin with. We will be recording this webinar and a copy will be sent out to you all afterwards. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end, so please do add them to the question panel on the screen. Due to regulatory restrictions, any questions or comments received involving freight or haulage pricing cannot be answered live. If you would like to find out more information around specific rates, then the correct connection can be made afterwards with the member of the appropriate team as soon as the webinar is finished. If we run out of time, we'll be sure to answer any further questions on top of that individually by email. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Adam.
Lee, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. It's great to see so many people joining us for this Moneycorp International Trade event today. My name is Adam Marshall. It's my privilege and my pleasure to be your host for today's discussion, where we'll be looking at the challenges and, of course, the opportunities that UK businesses are facing around international trade at what is a critical time for the UK economy as our reopening gathers pace. I think it's fair, ladies and gentlemen, to say that it's been an extremely eventful and often extremely trying year as well for many UK businesses trading goods across borders, both close to home on the European continent and indeed all across the world. I was thinking about it before today's conversation. I'm hard pressed to remember a time when firms simultaneously faced first, a huge set of legal changes to trade processes and trade flows and market access. The second, a major global disruption of trade as the pandemic really caused logistics to seize up right across the world. And then third, some unexpected additional events too, including the temporary blockage of one of the planet's most crucial trade arteries, the Suez Canal, thankfully now functioning again. Customs, logistics, and shipping are three of the key pressure points that UK companies have raised time and again in recent months. And today, the team at Moneycorp have brought together experts in all three of these areas to discuss some of the key issues and challenges in a bit more detail, and to share some of their practical advice and tips for businesses who are working hard to keep on trading. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure now to welcome Liam Smith, who is Director of Trade Facilitation at the British Chambers of Commerce, Alex Veitch, who's General Manager for Public Policy at Logistics UK, and Tom Cotton, who's Policy and Infrastructure Lead for England and Wales at the Road Haulage Association. Liam, Alex, and Tom, a warm welcome to all three of you. Great that you're with us.
Thank you very much. Thanks,
good morning.
Good to be
Thank you very much, Adam. Thanks.
We've had some great questions that were sent in to us prior to today's webinar, and I'll dive straight into those now whilst colleagues who have joined us today think up their own questions and submit them to us. Remember, if you do have a question throughout the session, please type it into the Q&A panel that's on your screen, and we'll get through as many as possible over the course of the next 50 minutes or so. So I'd like to start, though, if I can, by asking about some of the live customs issues that UK export businesses are facing. Some government ministers have suggested that the post-Brexit adjustment is just really a question of adaptation, learning how to deal with new paperwork and new processes. Is that the case, or is it more fundamental than that? Are some sectors facing more challenges than others? And I thought on this customs question, I'd come first, if I may, to Liam, who covers this area very ably for the British Chambers of Commerce. Liam, over to you.
Thank you, Adam. You cite a really important point for many businesses, which is, this question of adjustment, which they've, if we all recall, we had a deal done on Christmas Eve, publication of the arrangements on the 29th of December, and really businesses were having to, over the Christmas period, work out what that meant for them. So rather than 4 years of preparedness, businesses really had 4 days in which to become accustomed to a new border operating model. And that's not been without its woes, particularly in the early days as people got to grips with the paperwork. I'm sure people remember the fish exporter describing the 71 pages of documents required for a single truck. And whilst that seems like a lot of documentation, of course, it's realistically what was required for export of those goods into the European Union after the transition period. So for many businesses, it's an adjustment. For others, it's existential. Actually, what they face is the challenge of, particularly as trading businesses, perhaps where they're buying goods from one market and selling them into the EU, they find that they now have this gap in being able to have tariff-free trade because the goods don't originate in the UK. They're not UK origin goods. And so for some firms, and again, to cite some that have been in the media, Samantha Cameron's fashion business found that actually they were having to pay tariffs on goods that they were exporting to their customers in the European Union for the first time. And all of that is margin eroding. And when you erode margin, actually you bring into question whether that business that you're trying to transact is ever going to be profitable. So for some, it's adjustment, Adam. For others, actually, it's much more about looking deep into their business and trying to work out a way for them to continue to trade, to continue to serve the customers, and to continue to serve those markets.
Well, let me pick you up on that. Continuing to trade, continuing to serve their customers. Are there 2 or 3 practical things that firms can do when faced with this new customs challenge that get them part of the way there?
Yeah, definitely. And at Chamber Customs, we and the BCC, we're advising a number of firms on just these points, where actually on the face of it, it looks like they can't reach the origin, for example, threshold, but actually an adjustment to the way that they calculate origin. So there are 4 rules that you can apply to declare origin, and actually by looking at their product, their inputs in terms of labour, IP, and the tangible elements of a product that they are sending to other markets, can actually answer some of the questions so that they can have tariff-free trade, they can claim UK origin. So one of the things is to look at the origin of the goods that you trade out of the UK. The other thing is to look at the origin of the goods that you bring into the UK, perhaps for processing. Where do they come from? Where do they originate? And are there alternatives that are now more appealing in this new environment of a UK independent trade policy that perhaps seemed expensive before, but actually are no longer expensive? So we're seeing some substitution of UK supplies going to the EU, being substituted by EU traders who then go to a new supplier in the European Union. And so there may be capacity for a product that exists in the UK now because of the change that's taken place. So it's worth revisiting suppliers, revisiting the inputs, and making sure that actually you can be competitive in declaring origin. So origin is a big thing. And then the basic fundamental is, talk to a good customs broker or agent who can help you to understand this stuff for your business and your markets, and avail yourself of the grant funding available from the government. It's modest at £2,000, but it can buy you and contribute to the information and knowledge that you need to have to secure your business and make sure that you're sustainable beyond the next 3 to 6 months, actually into the years ahead.
Thanks, Liam. So rules of origin, if you haven't already read up on how they affect your business, that's one first stop, and then working with the great professional to help you navigate them is another. Thank you for that. I'll come on to Alex, if I may. Alex, we've talked a little bit there with Liam just now about exporters, but changes in the air for importers too. The Brexit process really isn't done as far as imports are concerned because some of the UK's own controls haven't even been put in place yet. What are some of the issues you're talking with businesses and with the logistics industry about now, and what's still to come there? And do you think that businesses, both in the EU, in the UK, and in the logistics sector itself, realize what still lies ahead, because this transition isn't completely done yet?
Yes, we feel we're in the never-ending transition, aren't we? Will we ever reach the end of the road here? So, look, it was probably for the best that the UK government pushed back the introduction of import controls. That does buy everybody more time to adapt. It is really going to happen though, and I think when it comes to imports, the challenge is much more significant to get things ready from the trader point of view, because we are a net importer. You know, we import more than we export with the EU, and it is harder to reach the EU exporters than it was to reach the UK exporters. Now, of course, there's two sides to every story. You need to reach the importers and the exporters together. I'll just back up for a second before we go forward. So what's happened here really is that our government's taken the approach of the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, or maybe the 90-10 rule here with all of this stuff. So what they've said is there are about 10,000 or so businesses that account for a very, very big proportion of trade with the EU. They're bigger businesses. And as Liam will know, because we're on a lot of these committees together, the UK government has fired its artillery in terms of comms, direct phone calls, webinars, all kinds of support at those bigger firms. And that has worked by and large, because we haven't seen the significant delays for the major routes in and out of the EU. Now, in January, we had an historic drop in exports, and I think everybody was terrified that would persist. We were encouraged to see that pick up again in February. And so the real acid test of whether it's worked in the long term is how the monthly trade figures go going forward. So the 90-10 rule is a good thing to do, because it keeps goods flowing and it deals with the huge proportion of goods. Now, what's also happened is SMEs have been caught out. They haven't had the same love and care. They haven't had the same amount of communication and support. And also there are some sectors where there are very, very significant challenges here, things like seafood exports to the EU. So you asked me about imports. So we need to now learn from what's happened before. So we're advising government, do the 90-10 rule again, reach out to the small number of larger businesses who account for most of the trade, do that, but learn from before. So also target where you know the difficult sectors are. So it's fresh food, particularly seafood. It's SMEs. We've had a lot of feedback about the parcel sector, which we think has calmed down now, but think about B2C transactions in parcels, and learn from the past, and try to, as well as delivering the big bang where you cover most goods, also try and get into those harder to reach audiences and markets, so that hopefully by the end of the year, as many EU exporters to the UK as possible are prepared, and perhaps better prepared than some of the UK exporters were.
Alex, thank you. It's really interesting what you say there about some of the EU exporters being just as unprepared, if not more so, than some of the UK ones were ahead of the end of the transition. And I know that government is out there broadcasting to them in their languages about what the changes are and what needs to shift in terms of their procedures to bring goods into the UK. But I'm sure it wouldn't hurt either, would it, for companies here to talk to their European suppliers and help them understand too what's coming? Because sometimes the information they get from their trusted partner is something that they rely on more than information they get from governments, for example.
Oh yeah, 100%. Completely agree with that. From our side of the fence, most of our members move other people's goods about. So we are talking to our sister organisations in the continent, trying to get them to get involved in all these seminars and events that the UK government's doing, which are very useful. And don't forget that the majority of trucks that you see moving between the UK and the EU are actually foreign trucks. You know, they're mostly from the EU. So it's really, really important that we reach out to everyone in that supply chain to try and make this work from January.
Let me bring Tom in at that point, if I may, because as you say, so many of the lorries going back and forth come from a plethora of different countries. But road haulage really is at the core of this. And Tom, it doesn't take much, does it, to slow things down, particularly in places like the short straits?
Yeah, Adam, thank you. Our members, obviously, the real perfect storm arrived on the 20th of December when France closed the borders because of COVID. That in its own right created absolute chaos. We had all the lorries parked up over Christmas, many of them continental ones, 11,000 trucks a day this time last year across the short straits. So the things that have probably helped is actually the Kent access permit, because obviously the hauliers had to be border ready before entering Kent, and there were some turnarounds in the early first few weeks of January, and those consisted of hauliers not having COVID tests, but also not being customs ready as well. So we had other members based around the ports, obviously for ease until Brexit arose, who were then having to travel to Severington to get IVF checks and to have the COVID checks. And that for them created incredible problems, and the logistics and the time wasted waiting for those clearances was absolutely phenomenal. So we've now seen things move on, and it's working relatively well, but we feel the numbers are way below where they should be because of stockpiling. But as Liam and Alex have already alluded to, January next year is the crunch time, and that is when, from our perspective, there is the facility for hauliers to become authorised consigners and consignees. And certainly we see that as a way to ease the border clearance protocol and the systems. So there's a lot to do. There is time to prepare. The Road Haulage Association actually have a webinar on the 6th of May, which is on our website for hauliers to be able to see how to make things work and ease the situation. So that's probably where we are at the moment, Adam.
Great, thank you. One thing I wanted to pick up with all three of you is related to the point Tom was just making, which was that one of the big shipping fears after Brexit, and indeed after the COVID closures that Tom just referred to, was that the short straits, the Dover to Calais route, would break down, and that fragility would become very clear, and we'd see huge delays. The government say we haven't seen this to date. And they like to cite figures saying that the number of lorries going through is very similar to what it was before the end of the transition. Other bodies have said, well, what's in them? And are they full or are they empty? So we know that there's debates about the data there. Is this a case, colleagues, of nothing to see here, or do you think it's because trade flows are still well below their normal levels for a variety of reasons? And any one of the three of you, very welcome to come in and start us off.
Maybe I could kick off. You know, the evidence from government is that the number of trucks moving is the same, but of course we know that the volume of exports has fallen. I mean, that's evidently the case, and whilst there was a bit of a tick back up in February, they were still down year on year.
Our members also report that most of certainly the food products are leaving empty, the trucks going back, so they're not taking anything out, and that is to just have an easy transit out.
Exactly, and the other factor at play here is the behaviours of people, in that traders were telling us during January, February, and continue to tell us that the cost of moving goods has increased. So part of that is to do with paperwork. Part of that, of course, has been to do with the fact that trucks risk delay. Some drivers are going back empty, and therefore the availability of space is limited, and consequently it's a commodified market, so the price correspondingly goes up. But the consequence of that is that for some traders, again, it drives them towards this issue of is this right for me? Does this exporting work for me anymore? Particularly on some sectors where volumes that are moved are significant, but margins are narrow. So that, you know, there are a number of issues. It's not there's nothing to see here. We haven't seen the full extent yet, Adam. And remember that from the European Union, goods are freely flowing in through the rural ports without paperwork, without delay, and without the controls that would typically be in place, and that won't come into play until the 1st of January next year. But I do want to remind businesses that the goods that they've imported from EU since the 1st of January in the current year do need to be submitted for full declaration 175 days maximum after the import. So whilst we can delay importing procedures until the end of December, we do need to deal with January entries in July, from 1st of July. So it's 175 days post-import. Full paperwork needs to be done.
Yeah. So people are getting people need to realize they're getting delays on their paperwork, not a free pass. And I think that there are quite a few businesses, both here in the UK and indeed on the continent, that don't yet realize that. And making sure you speak with your customs providers is going to be very, very important in order to deal with that. We've had a few questions starting to come in from the audience, but I wanted to encourage those who've joined us today to submit even more to us, because we'd love to get to as many of your practical questions as we possibly can over the course of the webinar. Of course, I've still got a few more pre-submitted ones for colleagues as well, but I want to delve into a couple of things that we've received from attendees. So if I can start with a point made by John Larkin. John has said a couple of things. First, he said the flow of goods into Europe has not improved over the last 4 months. We're still seeing delays of weeks into Spain and Ireland in particular. I wonder, colleagues, whether you recognize some of the difficulties that John's seen in particular markets. He's also said that most of the issues have now appear to be about clearance on the European side, and wonder if you agree with that as well. Alex, I see you nodding. Can I come to you first on John's point?
Yeah, I won't comment on Spain, but certainly we have had feedback about flows into Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, to be really specific about it. In January, there were some IT technical problems with systems. We've had a noticeable drop in flows to Northern Ireland by the Republic, and a rise to compensate for that through Scottish ports to Northern Ireland. There has been, for example, slight difficult arrangements about using transit. Tom mentioned authorised consignee, consignor. I agree with Tom, that's really important. So that's about using transit with a capital T. There have been somewhat difficult arrangements for that in Dublin as well. So yes, we are working very hard with our sister organisation, FTA Ireland, as I'm sure many others on this call are as well, to try and resolve that. But certainly, yeah, hopefully teething problems in the Republic. Spain, I'm afraid I won't be able to comment on that.
Alex, thank you. So the Port of Dublin in particular has been where a lot of these issues have arisen. I know we've seen that. Liam, you were nodding as well to John Larkin's question about European side customs clearance and particular markets. Is anything additional to add to Alex's point?
Well, just that what businesses are telling us is that it's not always clear why the delays happen. In the early days, we had businesses who had goods returned particularly by some of the big players in the market, larger players in the market, because they said they didn't have the correct paperwork, and the trader would say, well, actually the correct paperwork, the same paperwork worked in Norway but didn't seem to work for Germany. So you had, different issues at different borders. So it's not always clear to the trader why the delays are taking place, particularly when bringing goods, sending goods to customers in Europe, but also in bringing goods from Europe into the UK. And for SMEs particularly, where they're part of a consolidated load and part of a group of packages in a single truck, it can often be the case that actually the issue isn't them, it's actually some other consignment that's part of the load, because not every trader is buying a full load, and so they have to suffer the consequences of that.
Thank you. I want to come on to another question from the audience, if I may, that's come in from Milan Shah, an old friend of mine and former president of Northamptonshire Chamber of Commerce some years ago. Milan asks, how accurate was the Prime Minister's 24th of December 2020 assertion that and I quote, "There will be no non-tariff barriers to trade," unquote. Did the government do enough to assist business to prepare for the current trading regime? Now, Milan's being a bit mischievous there in his question, in that I believe the Prime Minister misspoke on that today by saying that there will be no non-tariff barriers. I remember hearing the comment myself and nearly falling off my chair, because of course the whole point of Brexit is there are going to be non-tariff barriers to trade in goods moving across borders. But Milan's point about whether the government did enough to assist businesses to prepare, I believe all of you will have views on that. Tom, I wonder if I can start with you there.
Well, certainly we feel that HMRC could have done an awful lot more than they did to help people. The messaging appeared to be mixed, it wasn't clear, and in some cases contradictory. And when members were trying to prepare, they were coming up against obstacles that there weren't any answers to the questions, and it appeared that HMRC didn't actually know the answers to some of those questions themselves. So where we had, it then appeared to be a case of mixed messaging, and certainly that was about the last thing that members needed, especially in the run-up and when they're trying to prepare, to have to set systems up and then find they have to change them, and then thinking that what they're doing is correct, only to find it isn't. So that, from our perspective, was a huge issue.
Yeah, indeed. I wonder, Alex, and any point that you would make on whether the government did enough to prepare people. I have to say, rather ironically, that a deal that's concluded a week before it comes into force leaves little time for people to get to grips with the practicalities. But perhaps you have a different view.
I have a bit of a different view. Yeah, I think it's more nuanced than that. So I said before that the government deliberately chose to do the 90-10 rule, and they really went to town with what they call the high value traders. So it is true that the government did an awful lot of work with these bigger firms to get ready, and January was very difficult because the deal came in so late, and there was a huge, just too much to assimilate in a week or two. The guidance, I think I'm right to say, the government had to turn around about 4,000 pages of guidance. So there were an awful lot of problems, as Tom has alluded to. But fundamentally, the bigger firms that we work with, the evidence of February indicates that actually readiness for these high value traders, for the bulk of the trade, was reasonably good.
Great.
But it's also true that there is a very long trailer distribution of SMEs and sole traders who had very little support at all. I think if you're an association that represents smaller businesses, that's how you feel, that's what you perceive. We represent a bit of everything, and certainly the bigger firms in logistics, the big shippers we work with, the big traders have spent years getting ready. I think the bigger issue, Adam, is really until last year, everyone was trying to guess whether we'd have some sort of Norway-style deal, or whether we'd have what we ended up with, which is a sort of Canada plus style deal. And once that clarity was in place, we could all see the direction of travel.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't quite agree. Actually, I think it's a bit more balanced, and I think we need to give the government a little bit more credit than they've had so far.
Yeah, so I think if I were to find a point of consensus between the two responses so far, perhaps bigger companies were able to navigate well, and those with really significant value and volume moving across borders. But for those who are either smaller in size or who are trading across borders in an ad hoc way, more support required. I'd like to come on, if I can, to a different question that's come in. There's quite a few that have come in from the audience, so thank you very much for being so responsive, everyone. Laura Lane has asked a question about VAT, that dreaded word now when it comes to trading across borders. She's asked, what are the current VAT rules for exports to the EU and for intra-EU deliveries? Because obviously there have been some significant changes here. I wonder if anyone would like to pick that one up first, because obviously this is a big set of changes. Alex, you look like you were about to say something, and then, or sorry, Liam, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in. So I mean, the key change for UK businesses is the something that we campaigned at the BCC for a number of years, and won in the budget in November 2018 from memory, 2019 rather, and that's postponed VAT accounting. So goods moving into the UK from outside the UK, no matter Europe or rest of the world, traders no longer have to account for the VAT on the date of import. They can account for the VAT in their ordinary VAT return. To the other point about goods going to the European Union, well, it really, the answer is it depends. It depends whether the goods are going to another entity within the business, so it could be a branch office or another part of the company. There may be arrangements that are in place that take full advantage or make best use of the VAT rules in both the country of export and the country of import. If it's business to consumer, then VAT would need to be paid in the country by someone at the point of import into, for example, the European Union, but wouldn't be charged on goods leaving the UK and going to the EU. But actually, in relation to specific questions on VAT, I think the thing to do is not to come to people like us, but to go to a VAT expert who will take the context of your firm, the markets you're going to, the products that you're selling, which may be zero rated or may be rated for duty at varying rates, and give you best advice.
Okay. Alex, did you want to add anything there? I saw you were about to speak as well.
I was very grateful Liam jumped in before me, actually.
VAT is never anyone's favourite topic, is it?
Yeah, and look, all I'd say is that something that's caused a lot of people out is the government changed its rules on what they call low value consignment relief or low value that relief, and it's complicated. But we know from feedback in the parcel sector, for example, B2C flows, they've been surprised. People have been surprised to see that on the invoice. So again, please do check the rules, check the value of what's being imported, and it may be liable for that, but it is one you'll need to look at depending on your circumstances.
Thank you.
It's a good point, Adam. If I just to add briefly to that, and thanks for raising it, Alex, on low value consignment relief. It's £135 as a threshold. It's important to understand that for in customs terms, the valuation on which you base the VAT is a customs valuation, which can include the transport cost of the goods as well as the value of the goods as they are traded. It's not such a complicated subject. You can easily go to gov.uk and look it up.
Liam, I think we've lost your microphone. So I might come back to you on that in just a second, if that's okay. Oh, you're back now. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I don't know what you caught and what you missed, but I'll just go back on low value consignment.
Look it up on gov.uk, and then we lost you.
Yeah, you can, but there are nuances to it, and where companies can sometimes get themselves into trouble is where they undervalue goods to go below the threshold. I'm not saying many firms do it, but that is a tactic sometimes that's used to avoid the need to pay duty. Businesses should be careful that they properly classify the goods related to the value that you would expect to pay for those goods in the marketplace.
Thank you. I want to come on to another question or two. I might bring a couple of them together, if I may, because they refer to some specific markets and some places where people are having particular difficulties. And come to Tom first, if I can. Stephen Allen has said, the trade routes are now opening up directly to Ireland, bypassing the UK. I think by that he means the provision of a lot of additional ferry services between France and the Republic of Ireland, which we've seen in recent months, meaning that the use of the UK as a land bridge to get goods from the continent to the Republic of Ireland has lessened somewhat. And Steve is asking, how much of an impact is that on freight numbers, on UK traffic, and on congestion in the world of road transport? Tom, have you seen this happening?
Well, certainly our members have experienced problems of just exporting to Ireland in its own right. The exact detail and the issues there obviously impact Northern Ireland significantly. We've had reports, but probably not as many reports as about the short straits issue. So the Dover-Calais crossing area has been, it appears, more problematic. I'm aware of government intervention to ease the transition, probably about a month into Brexit, or once the process being completed. So Again, things seem to have calmed down. That's it's a problem, but it doesn't seem to be as big of a problem as it was originally.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. And I think on the sort of routes that bypass the UK, Alex, I know I've been speaking with colleagues in the Republic of Ireland, have heard that I think there are 8 times as many ferries now going from Cherbourg to Rosslare as previously. Are you seeing the same thing, just diversion of traffic to use different routes in order to avoid issues?
Yeah, we are, and our sister organisation FTA Ireland just did an interesting report on this. I mean, they've seen a 100% year-on-year increase in the amount of freight moving directly between the Republic of Ireland and continental Europe, and many more sailings a week between Rosslare and the continent. And so the question is, is this going to persist? Is this something that's shorter term? But it's common sense to think that you're still within the single market zone. You're moving it direct from the continent, direct to the Republic. You can avoid some of the issues Tom and I have been talking about on the call. We have seen reduced flows through Holyhead, and I think the stats always take about 2 or 3 months to come through in the most reliable way. So the next round of shipping stats will tell us a lot more. But the more things I suppose our government can do to make trade easier, transit, consignor, the better, because we need to make sure the land bridge is still a functioning, viable, resilient route for all traders.
Okay, thank you, Alex. And there's a related question that's come from Andy Kirby, who says, we deliver household goods from England directly to end customers in Northern Ireland, average value £50. But because we don't have a business address in Northern Ireland, we now have to pay tariffs on these, albeit there is a customs waiver we can apply for. Is there a way around this bar of getting a Northern Ireland business address? And if not, how easy is it to get such an address, to ensure that you have the right sort of shipping destination? Liam, I wonder if I might aim this one at you, because we get a lot of questions coming in webinars like this about Northern Ireland specifically, given the protocol.
Yeah, I think what the questioner was alluding to is this need for an address, an establishment address within the European Union, in effect, in the event that customers have complaints, or they want to have redress with the products that they have for sale. And we did see last year a number of firms set up and be prepared to offer those establishment addresses within the north and within the Republic of Ireland. So that may be one route to go, but the other is actually to get the customs waiver. The process for accessing that isn't overly complex, and as it's direct to consumer, there's also the low value consignment relief opportunity, but that doesn't get rid of the tariff in and of itself, but the waiver would. So I would encourage the questioner to look at the waiver, and if they need some advice on that, to come to us, and perhaps we can find a way of helping them to get that.
Great, thank you for that, Liam. There are a few other questions coming in from the audience, so colleagues, bear with me on these, and then I'll come back to a couple of the ones that I had in mind previously. Paul Hull has said there still seems to be a massive shortage of customs agents on the European side, and that this is causing issues for new exporters and importers, as it's hard to get an agent due to capacity. Are the UK government in discussions with EU countries to resolve this? PS, costs are astronomical due to this as well. Well, as you would expect in economics, whenever a supply of something is greatly constrained, the price does tend to go up. So customs agents on the European side, Alex, have you seen anything on this as an issue facing your members? And then Liam, I'm sure you'll have something to contribute on this as well.
It's a really good question, and actually we're being asked this by the government at the minute. How is this whole issue about capacity? Now, clearly we represent UK businesses, and an observation we made early on was that a lot of people were calling customs agents and asking for essentially business advice, and a lot of customs agents were ready and tooled up to do transactional work. And that's where some of the issues are raised, because the busy agents that did not have time to help an individual business navigate the way through the labyrinth of rules and regulations and odd guidance to even understand what transactions they needed to make. And I think, well, I'm not doing a sales pitch for Liam here, but that's where the chambers really come in handy, because they can hopefully provide a bit more of that hand-holding advice, and other offers are available. But we haven't had direct feedback about a shortage on the EU side. It's something that I will actually pick up with our member groups that do a lot of international shipping and trade, and see where the status is. So I'm sorry, it's a bit of a woolly answer, but it's not something I can really comment on now.
Now, I wonder, Liam, would you like to come in on that as well? Paul's point about customs agents on the European side.
We're not hearing of a shortage of customs agents on the European side, where businesses want to have a customs agent commissioned under direct representation. And this is where the customs agent provides the connections, the pipe work, and the facilities to file the customs import declaration or export declaration, or to do the transit transaction, the T1s, and so on. Where there is a shortage is where businesses are looking for indirect representation. They're asking the customs broker to account for the VAT, to account for the duty, and to act in an indirect capacity. That's where the constraints lie. And so the way to overcome, and the reason the constraints rise, because for the broker, that carries a lot of risk. So they become responsible for the VAT and the duty due on, let's imagine that it's a container load of shellfish with a high value. That can be a very significant risk to take on board, to take on. And so where direct representation is what the customer wants, then there's not an issue, but that requires the customer or the exporter from the UK to also have an establishment somewhere within the European Union. And that's where the difficulty is for businesses, and our government need to respond to that, in my view, by helping businesses to get the advice that they need, advisory services, not guidance, on locations in the EU which are easiest to establish, lowest cost, and enable businesses to facilitate the establishment of even it's a virtual office, a presence within the EU, in order that they can avail themselves of direct representation from brokers and agents within those 27 countries.
Thank you, Liam. I'd like to come on to a question now, if I may, changing gears a little bit, from Sarah Scarce. And Sarah has said, I've noticed problems in goods getting cleared into Germany. So this is another market where someone is noticing issues arising. Whilst it has gotten a little quicker since January, she says, it's still painfully slow despite having all the correct paperwork. I think Sarah's put that in emphasis there for us, because clearly has got paperwork in order, but facing some difficulties. Does anyone on the panel have any insights or thoughts on this? I suppose, can I just ask for a show of hands from our panelists? How many of you have heard of issues involving Germany specifically? 3 out of 3. Right. Who'd like to? 4 out of 4. Alex, do you want to kick us off? I think come to Tom and I'll come to all of you, in fact. But Alex, really quickly, do you want to start us off on Sarah's question?
Yeah, just quickly. We have had this from a very big parcels and express operator, who I will not name, one particular major city in Germany, in fact, and it was something daft as this. They were sticking rigidly to opening hours, and so you just could not get something cleared if the place was closed. I mean, it sounds silly, but for such a major economy. So yeah, that has been an issue, and I think very quickly, the route that we have to take with these things is to go to the UK permanent, I think it's the mission to the EU, it's called now, and see if they can very kindly engage with EU member states to try and get a more consistent application of rules, and to pick up specific comments that come through. So the detail of that has obviously been fed up to the government. But yeah, we have picked up interest in, we have picked up things about Germany. Yeah.
Right. Okay, Tom, any specific issues from you in addition to that on Germany?
Yeah, I'm afraid my experience is anecdotal. The RH has been focusing more on trying to facilitate trucks out of the UK across the short straits, and with all the issues there. So our energy, if you like, has been more focused on just trying to get the trucks clearing the UK into Europe. So I'm afraid I don't have any specifics particularly on Germany, although of course aware of problems out there.
Yeah, so it's not generally a ro-ro destination. It's a little bit different to that. Lee, you'd raised your hand as well from Moneycorp. So any particular issues you're seeing amongst customers there?
So we're definitely hearing a lot of feedback from clients right now, and I've seen it personally as well, where I've been trying to bring things in from overseas, and I was bringing a bottle in from Austria, and it got stuck in Germany, which then led me to start asking some questions of clients that are using European routes as well, and a lot of noise did come back to Germany, which I found quite interesting.
And Liam, finally, do you have any advice for Sarah or any other insight for Sarah on this? It sounds to me like certain markets are presenting more of a bureaucratic difficulty than others.
It can be certain markets, and Germany is certainly one where maybe it was pedantry, but we did have early cases of the wrong coloured ink being used on documents, for example. They wanted different coloured ink, which comes down to the behaviours of a specific border agent, a border guard, rather than that it's anything structural. So you get issues such as that. Most movements would be, a lot of movements to Germany would be under transit, under the Common Transit Convention. And there were issues with that early on, which have broadly been resolved and ironed out. And the other thing is it can come down to the commodity that you're shipping to a specific market, where a market can be more sensitive about certain commodities and therefore be more rigorous about protecting their indigenous industry. So it can be about the product. And I don't know what product we're dealing with here for Germany, but it can be that sometimes there are protections that countries have that mean that they scrutinise your product more than they would typically in another country. So it's adapting to the system. Even when the paperwork is right in your view, there may be someone who decides that it's wrong in their view. That's the nature of borders. We want to control them. Wasn't that what Brexit was about?
Yeah, and something that's come to my mind from the pandemic might be relevant here. With the vaccination program, there's a yellow card system in place for people to report adverse events. Might be a great thing to have a similar yellow card system in place to report when border officials in various countries perhaps are causing some of the issues that Sarah's raised in her question. And if patterns arise, you would then expect both national governments and the European Commission to examine those in detail. I suspect, Sarah, that if there are problems clearing things in Germany, that there will be many enterprising logistics businesses, or indeed well-equipped customs authorities in Belgium or the Netherlands, for example, that might be very happy to clear things for you. And people are looking for alternative routes and alternatives where they see that the bureaucracy has gotten more difficult. Tommy Hutchinson has asked a question which I'm going to use Chair's privilege to answer very quickly, because it's actually a little different to some of the others we've seen, which have all been about moving goods, which is the core point of today's discussion. But Tommy's question is about, can the panel outline the effect on services, in particular hosting conferences or events in the EU and UK personnel working in the EU for short periods? Well, this issue of mobility, Tommy, that you've raised here is really a difficult and vexed one, because if you read the trade and cooperation agreement between the UK and the EU, there are literally hundreds of pages on which type of profession can move to work for short periods of time into the EU. There are reservations from individual countries about who can and who can't, because immigration is still controlled largely at a national level within the EU. And I think we're going to start to see real problems as borders reopen, with companies that provide services along with their goods, for example, being able to move technicians or engineers or architects or other sorts of personnel around, even for short periods of time. And I think this is unfinished business within the UK-EU relationship. And my hope certainly is that the two sides, as the agreement beds in, will look to build on the mobility arrangements that are in place there, so that individual professionals who are simply going over to spend a little bit of time in order to host an event, for example, as you're saying, or work on a particular project, will be able to do so without difficulty. So I'm afraid that's work in progress and something we're still going to have to see for the future. Tom, I wanted to come on to something else, coming back to goods, if I may, which is what we're seeing at the other key sort of roll-on, roll-off ports here in the UK. Do we feel that local authorities who actually control a lot of the accesses to these areas are doing everything that they can to coordinate and make sure that people can move lorries through the ports safely and successfully? I think about this in the context of Kent, for example, where there were difficulties of coordination between national and local authorities when the border was shut. But I'd also think about places, you know, in the east of England, for example, where we've got roll-on, roll-off ports, or indeed around Portsmouth, where there's not a lot of space around the port, for example, to move trucks through. So what are you seeing, and do we have the level of coordination that's required there?
Well, certainly with Dover, as mentioned earlier, going back a year ago, 11,000 trucks a day crossing the short straits. So what we've seen in the Dover area is lay-bys closed, which we've been given an assurance of being reopened. But certainly there was, or Kent County Council perceived fly parking to be a problem. Now, I don't recognise fly parking because parking is either legal or illegal, and the signage there determines whether it is legal or illegal. So we've had trucks, or certainly from the domestic side of things, we've had domestic deliveries going into Kent where drivers have been penalised for taking rest inappropriately. We've even had members in Kent have their vehicles clamped outside their own operating centres because they've been perceived to be illegally parked, which is absolutely ridiculous. So certainly the local authorities need to be more in tune with the needs of road freight. And again, everything that's in your office, where you are at the moment, at some stage has been delivered by road freight. So it is totally critical that road freight can operate unimpeded and with a minimum amount of restrictions. We've seen Manston, Severington initiated, but there's been a massive lack of lorry parking and driver facilities in Kent for decades. And 5 years ago, Department for Transport even designated Kent as critical. And yet it seems really bizarre that we can have an inland border facility built at Severington in a matter of months, where we've been lobbying for years to have lorry parking improved, increased. And again, we have local planning and local authorities who've refused lorry parking planning permission because of the NIMBYism involved. Now, in actual fact, if you have trucks parked in the right place, that's fine. And again, back in 2015, we had the My Ferry Link dispute. We saw queues in Kent, and we've had a Eurotunnel fire. We've had previous ferry outages causing the short straits to cease operating, and yet we don't have the correct lorry facilities and driver facilities in Kent for when that eventuality happens. And when we look at Operation Stack and Operation Brock, those are really temporary resilience measures, and they don't actually go to solving the problem. And when we go forward to next January, are we going to have a similar type of problem? I certainly hope we don't, and that operators and consigners and consignees can get everything put in place to enable that smooth transition. But again, the resilience needs to be there for other eventualities such as weather conditions and the unforeseen circumstances.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. We're coming up against some time constraints, colleagues, but I want you to get your crystal balls out and in one sentence help me answer one last question very quickly. Stephen Allen has asked whether there would be an anticipated COVID impact on trade looking ahead when we realized that we had pretty brittle supply lines all around the world. Do you think, and actually this could be a yes or no answer in the interest of time, that we've yet seen the full impact of COVID and the pandemic on trade and trade flows? Alex, yes or no?
No. Excuse me, no.
Liam?
No.
Tom?
No, and there is a caveat on that, but lorry drivers have tested very low levels of positive tests as well.
Right, and Lee?
I'll be adding a fourth no to that, Adam, definitely.
Yeah,
not.
so I think the answer to this question is that we've still got more change to go in the way that we trade. And certainly I know a lot of companies, including many on the call, will probably be looking at their own supply chains and scratching their heads and saying, do I need to diversify a little bit more? You know, is resilience better than lowest price? Do I need to bring some things closer to home and make my supply chain shorter so that I know I can always get the inputs that I need? And I know a lot of people will be puzzling through that over the weeks and months ahead. Which means, ladies and gentlemen, that we probably have much material there for a future Money Corp seminar of this description. I'd like to thank once again our guests, Liam, Alex, and Tom, for making the time to speak with us today. And I'm sure we can all agree that this was a highly informative discussion, and it's one that has added a huge amount of value to businesses at a really sensitive time. Before we finish, I did want to raise one final point, if I may. You'll have noticed perhaps that today's panel, unlike many other Money Corp events, featured only male speakers. This was neither intentional nor was it planned, especially when so much of international trade is powered by women. And I know that this is something that the Money Corp team works really hard to get right, and that they're absolutely committed to addressing in the future. And I felt it was important to mention this as we close today's event and as we thank our expert panelists as well. So once again, I want to say thank you to Money Corp for inviting me to chair today's webinar, and I want to hand back to Lee, if I may, for final comments.
Thank you very much, Adam. I'd also echo your final point. Diversity and inclusion is important to Money Corp, as you will have seen in previous webinars that we've produced. So thank you for making that point so eloquently. Thank you for brilliantly chairing the session today. And to our panel of esteemed experts, Tom, Liam, and Alex, I wholeheartedly thank you for your input. I found it absolutely fascinating, and I like that I've walked away from this knowing a little bit more. And that's the key for me. If you'd like to get in touch with Money Corp to discuss your international payment requirements or for guidance on your business's shipping, logistics, or customs needs, please either contact your account manager or email events@moneycorp.com. Alternatively, you can visit moneycorp.com for more information on our products. So thank you to everybody for joining, and have a fantastic week.
Thank you.
Thank you.